Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Fulhamish podcast. It's your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Jack Collins, and welcome to the Thursday Club, where I'm delighted to say that I'm rejoined once again, back in the building, ladies and gentlemen, former Fulham correspondent at The Athletic, now London football reporter at The Times. It's Mr. Peter Rutzler. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, I really appreciate that, Jack. That was a lovely build-up. I'm doing okay, mate. I'm doing good. I've been busy. Lots have changed. But yeah, I'm in a good place. So it's been a while since I've been on, hasn't it? So first time since I've changed my role. Big transfer, obviously, in the middle of November.
You're outside the window. Emergency
outside
transfer.
the window. Quite old school in that sense, I suppose. Rumours of tapping up.
What do they call them in France? Joker transfers. You get one a year.
The Joker transfer, yeah, very good reference. Yeah, I like that. One a year, so that the Times have plucked for me. Let's see if they kept the receipt, shall we? But no, it's going all right. It's going okay. It's going good.
I was going to say, how is the new role? What are you up to? Are you basically just crossing London in search of stories? What's the job?
Yeah, well, I think most people will have noticed that my Twitter feed is very Chelsea now, and I don't think that will have gone unnoticed. So let's address it here. The role is a London one. I'm doing a lot of Chelsea. That's my sort of focus area. So unfortunately, you're going to have to suffer that, Fulham fans. Still some Fulham. You know, I still keep an eye on everything. But yeah, so it's all London, which is quite good. So doing some talking about Tottenham and talking about not so much Arsenal actually, but then everything and anything else really that sort of comes my way. So yeah, it's but usually when I take over covering a team, they get relegated. It's actually been the complete opposite with Chelsea. They've actually been incredibly good. So yeah, something's changed on that front, I think.
The Rutzler relegation curse, I think, is long dead. Since Peter the promoter arrived, it's been nothing but upward trajectories since you've taken over at clubs. It looks like it's going that way again. Let's talk about some Fulham bits and bobs, and we'll start with that game at the weekend. A 1-1 draw at the Cottage against Arsenal. Obviously, it was covered on the Monday podcast, but it's always nice to kind of give a last word on it after a couple of days to reflect and look back. And I think that in some ways, it was an interesting game. Now, there are differing viewpoints on this. Mikel Arteta came out afterwards and said that he thought Arsenal had done enough to go and win that game. I think from a perspective of being in the Hammersmith end, it was, Fulham weren't on top. I don't think by anybody's metrics. It wasn't a game that Fulham dominated. But defensively, I thought they stood up really well to the questions that Arsenal asked. I think that considering the set pieces had been so heavily highlighted beforehand, Fulham did well dealing with them in the first half, a little bit less so, clearly, in the second half. What did you make of the game as a whole, Peter?
Yeah, well, I think it was impressive from Fulham, to be honest, and we've seen that all season, haven't we, against the bigger teams. I mean, the game against Manchester City, obviously Manchester City have had their own issues, but we saw in that game not just Fulham's ability to cause teams problems and the quality that they have in the side that on their day can really produce impressive performances, but also the sort of tactical pragmatism of Marco Silva, capable of adjusting his game plan depending on an opponent, and particularly against the big opponents. I think we saw something similar here. I think we saw a much more defensive Fulham than we often do. I think that's a sign of respect, really, for how impressive Arsenal can be. I understood the setup by putting a Traore on the left, basically trying to exploit the space in behind Thomas Partey when he was inverting, kind of reminiscent of what Silva tried to do at City. I did think that on the flip side probably contributed to why Fulham's build-up wasn't always so fluent as we can become used to. But that said, particularly in the first half, Fulham really grew into the game. There were some lovely passages of play. Arsenal didn't create very much at all, and I think we'll probably come on to how good Fulham have been defensively. But they became quite reliant on the set pieces, and obviously that was a major narrative coming into the game. And saw one stat that said that I think 75% of Arsenal's XG, so the best quality chances, were coming from set plays. it's almost this sort of, it's a great asset, but you don't want to just fall into relying on it and getting trapped in a sort of a Tony Pulis prison, if you see what I mean. I think, well, obviously the most impressive part was the goal, right? I think the goal was an unbelievable goal. I saw a clip doing the rounds as well that counted all the passes. I think it was 21, wasn't it? It was more than 20 passes.
21 passes. Beautiful.
Superb move. Obviously, Raul Jimenez outstanding in that. But yeah, I think just to sum up my little ramble, I thought it was a really impressive display. While we didn't see what Fulham can do on the ball as much as we normally do, particularly creatively in the final third, but defensively, again, we saw Fulham do well, and we saw Silva set up his team to cause an opponent with higher quality players significant problems and took a result.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we talked about a little bit, Sammy and I, last week on the Thursday Club, which was on Friday after the Brighton game. And it was this sense that Fulham were frustrated, I think, from a fan base perspective at times, because it felt like we were parked in our own kind of the final third, if you will, and actually setting up that block to counter. But what you kind of forget sometimes is how good these sides are. Now, Brighton were a very, very good side, and probably from a kind of fluidity standpoint have been better across the course of the season. The table doesn't lie in some ways than Fulham have been this season. And Arsenal are title challengers if they, maybe not if they keep dropping points like this, but right now you would still have Arsenal in the title discussion. They've been there for a couple of years. We know this is a very good side. And whilst there's a lot of noise around this set piece business, actually that kind of really does reduce Arsenal to something different. But Fulham made them reduced in that regard. Fulham were reductive in what they allowed Arsenal to do by Alex Iwobi dropping into that kind of wing back role. And there was a really nice piece from one of your former colleagues at the Athletic, Michael Cox, on Marco Silva's tactics and what this kind of looks like and actually how Fulham have set up here to kind of build on strengths in this regard. And he kind of mentioned that in some ways this looked a little bit like what Fulham did under Scott Parker. And whilst that's obviously not something that Fulham fans are going to want to hear, there is something that you kind of look at and you think, okay, what's that done, this 5-4-1? And it was pretty similar against City with Iwobi as that kind of Bobby De Cordova-Reed player. And what it does is it means that you can overload that left-hand side from a Fulham perspective, which overloads Arsenal's right. And it means that Bukayo Saka, Martin Odegaard can't get into the game quite as effectively because there's two players doubling up in those areas in order to stop them. And Fulham basically pointed out and went, all right, then, go on then, attack us down the left. Attack us down the left where Alex Iwobi is. That's where we are, inverted commas, weaker defensively because we've got a winger playing in that role. If you want to come at us, come down that way. And Arsenal didn't do that. They weren't able to do that. Trossard was okay, but I don't think he tore the place apart. Gabriel Martinelli came on. And again, I think a lot of people from an Arsenal persuasion were frustrated with what he was doing. And actually, whilst you look at that, and that season under Parker is one often best not spoken of, that did work at times defensively that season.
I know. I feel like it's become a parody of itself. Like just the mention of Scott Parker, and then suddenly it just everything explodes, and then it's become like a continual narrative. During that season, when we were analysing the team, the way they were setting up, we were quite pleased with and quite impressed with. I think in hindsight, there probably could have been more going forward, and I think that's the continual discussion with Scott Parker. What his team's produced.
There was too much sacrifice, right, for defensive solidity to allow us to score enough goals to stay in the division.
Absolutely, but if you remember the start of the season, it was going pretty grim, and then we started to see, as you said, that Bobby De Cordova-Reed sort of role. I remember doing a piece and fiddling around. I think it was Tactical Pad, the software where you can turn like a little GIF and it looks like the old school Football Manager before it had 3D images.
The dots.
The dots. That's it. And yeah, we saw a bit of that, but I think you have to do that, right? That's again just going back to the point made before about just being tactically versatile, being flexible with the tools you had. I actually had a very similar conversation on Monday. I was doing the first time went on the Times is the Game podcast, and we did talk about Fulham a bit, but this was more about Ange Postecoglou and sort of the tension between sticking with what you want to do and the aspect of just adapting to the tools you have and the realities that you're facing and then still getting results. And it's coaches like Marco Silva, Thomas Frank, Antonee Robinson to an extent, slightly
Sasa
different.
perhaps?
Who are doing that. They have their clear philosophy. You know what Fulham are like on their day. You know they can be dominant, and Michael Cox basically outlines that in the piece too. You know what they want to be doing. You know that they're going to do the wide rotations. That's Silva's thing. Second most crosses in the league, I think. That's always been a key theme. But then also they will adapt to get results because it's a results business, and that's how you move up the table. And if you're able to be that versatile and be able to go, right, look, we're playing Arsenal. We're going to have to focus on shutting them down a little bit. We're going to have to sit deeper than we would like. I think they probably were deeper than probably Marcus Silva would want. And I think that comes back to the disrupted wide rotations. I mean, I was watching the game from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium because I was covering Spurs-Chelsea evening, which was a quiet game. And it was dipping in and out of the game. But it did feel like in passages in the first half, I think less so in the second half, the passages in the first half where you had the team are so accustomed to those. You had Kenny Tete and Adama Traore on the right, and they're doing those rotations, and on the left you'd have Robinson and Iwobi. I know that's changed as the season's gone on, but I think the setup was Robinson and Traore on the left, wasn't it? And it was Tete and Iwobi doing the wing-back role. So while that added a defensive aspect, it's those understandings weren't quite as fluid as normal. And even Lukic and Berger, who we'll talk about later about how they filled in for Palhinha, as they've been fantastic. Again, it's a two, right? It's more of a two. It's not more of a box to box in there. So you lose those triangles and you lose that progression up the field, but you still come away with the result, and you come away with Arsenal creating very little from open play, which most teams struggle to do because this isn't just Arsenal. After the injuries and whatever, Martin Odegaard, Bukayo Saka, they're an impressive team.
Yeah, they're a very good unit. I think we can all agree on that. It is quite interesting, and I think that this is the next thing. And before we come on to Sasha and Sander, who were absolutely exceptional in the middle, I just did want to touch on the corners because, yes, Arsenal scored from one in the second half, but up to that point, actually, after that, it got a little bit more iffy. But up to that point, Fulham had dealt with it really, really well. And I thought it was interesting kind of looking at the analysis of how they dealt with it. Adama Traore basically being the person to block Saliba was something quite interesting because at the time, I was looking at it from behind the goal and thinking, why on earth is Adama Traore marking William Saliba? We're about to, this is an Arsenal corner. What on earth are they trying? But actually, because Saliba's job is so specific and it's to get in front of the goalkeeper, it was Adama basically holding him off with an arm and at one point pushing him off the pitch. There's no foul there. He just literally just holds him, and Saliba ends up running into the side netting rather than getting round and getting to the goalkeeper. And actually, it's very, very smart when you're faced with situations like this to be able to analyze it and think, well, how do we deal with this? That's not just stick our biggest player on Saliba and hope that we can handle him. It was an actual genuine thing that Fulham did. And actually, it's frustrating in some ways that we can't talk about it in a more glowing sense because Saliba obviously gets away in the second half and ends up scoring the equaliser. But actually, from a kind of tactical and switched on perspective, I was really impressed with how Fulham set up from that perspective.
Yeah, it was a sort of a nightclub bouncer mode, right? It's funny because it has reached such a overwhelming level, hasn't it? Discussion about Arsenal set pieces. I went to Marco Silva's press conference on Friday. It was on Friday, wasn't it? And yeah, again, that was the key theme. And I think Marco Silva in his first start was like, well, yeah, you can just look at what we did last time because we scored twice from set pieces against Arsenal last season and conceded none. But then asked him again in the writers bit and just sort of pushed him a bit and been like, look, it's become a narrative unto itself. Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. How much does that affect things? You'll feel it in the ground. And he said the same thing. He said it's the extent to which everyone is expecting it. That's quite difficult to prepare for. So we're not going to spend 2 days preparing for set pieces when Thursday to Sunday you haven't got much time to get things ready. But there are things that you can do to prepare, and there are things that you can't really stop. And he spoke specifically about the takers, and I that is talked about, and I think it is praised. But the consistency of delivery from Arsenal set piece takers is phenomenal, because it's always an adage about players never past the first man, blah, blah, blah. And normally that's because they're aiming for the near post or someone at the near post to do a flick on. That's why it happens. But even so, it's difficult even for the elite players to consistently hit the same target, to deliver the ball with that much pace. But yet we see that with Arsenal, Declan Rice, Bukayo Saka. It's clearly worked on and it's been honed exceptionally. And Silva was basically like, there's nothing really you can do. Because like with most set plays, if you're taking the set play, you have the advantage because you know what you're doing. And if you're able to put the ball on a spot, okay, unless you've somehow figured it out, I mean, Arsenal do have consistent set play routines, but they can shift the spot in whichever way they want. So yeah, the key thing was to try and prevent the scenario where you lose runners and you get blocked. It's picks and blocks. I mean, we talked about this in the Championship with Marcus.
From a Fulham perspective, right?
Yeah.
Fulham
are fantastic. Yeah, exactly. It's really effective, and and they're letting these things go. I think you can make an argument about what's a foul and what's not, but if it's just a block, and then I think it will be quite divisive about what people enjoy about the game and whatever, but it's such an important part of the game. I think there is an element, because Silva didn't like this, but he was asked by one of the reporters the goal that Fulham scored from a corner against Brighton was the first in 127 corners. Ooh. So, which was a lot, which surprised me, because we've talked about how good they've been, but and Silva didn't really like that, because we know. And Fulham spend ages working on this. They'll always do it the day before a game. They'll walk through the routines. It's just not quite happened. But a lot of that is on delivery, and it's also on finish, right? I think one of the reasons I think Silva pointed out was that Fulham have lost. Obviously, Mitrovic was one in the first season, but then Palhinha as well. Another, yeah. Willian for takers. That's going to have an impact on how effective you are from dead balls. Whereas you look at Arsenal, and I mean, oh my God, they are so well equipped for it defensively, in terms of the height they've got and the way they attack the ball. So I think that was an area that, I think Fulham themselves will want to improve. But, defensively, they've done okay. And I remember, even if we go back even further to Silva at Everton, I remember conceding goals from set plays was such a big thing. It's a subject for Silva. Like he will want to do well with those.
Yeah, I mean, naturally. I mean, I was hugely impressed by the way that obviously there's a lot of corners that you see delivered to the back post that get plucked out of the air by the goalkeeper. And Arsenal just seem to be able to deliver to the back post time and time again. Now, maybe it is those blockers not letting the keeper get out to it or whatever, but that area that they can deliver to is such an impressive one. And it does make you think, like, obviously Arsenal are very good at this, and as you say, are very well equipped. But Fulham still have, at the moment in particular, Issa Diop playing, Calvin Bassey playing, Sander and Sasa not small. Raul has been good with his head in the past. Now, whether that's still the same thing is a slightly different question. But it shouldn't be the kind of feeling that the Fulham shouldn't be able to attack and make things happen from corners. So there is that element, I suppose, of frustration when you see someone else doing it so well that you want to tune in. But it's not like they're not working on it, as you say. Talking of Sasha and Sander, I thought that they were excellent. And I got sent a graph today, which is on the Cottage Tacticos feed on Twitter. Always an excellent read, and which basically shows where things are going from. It basically shows how Sasha and Sander have stepped in for Joao Palhinha. And I thought it was really interesting kind of looking at it. They've taken kind of Palhinha's graph from last year in a couple of bits, ball carrying, forward pass percentages, key passes, progressive passes, duels, and defensive actions. And the thing that stands out is Sasha Lukic coming very, very close this season to recreating the defensive action output as Joao Palhinha was putting out last season. Now, Sander's no slouch either, but it's Lukic that's right down there with him. And together in the middle at the weekend, they snuffed out danger time and time again. They moved as a partnership. They moved as a pair. Now, I don't think this necessarily answers all the questions about who plays where and what in Fulham's midfield, because they were asked to do a very specific job here. But what we are seeing is that shield put together, as two, real number sixes in this game. Maybe that changes in other games. Maybe Sasha has a little bit more license to roam. Maybe Sander does with the ball at his feet as well. But the way that they just shielded this back line against a very, very competent Arsenal midfield, hugely impressive, Peter.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it goes back to before. I think the flip side is that you don't have the same on the ball combinations. I think that just needs time to work out how you play that second role, because Silva's midfield has always been it's a 6, an 8, and an 8. One of the 8s is basically a 10, and the other 8 can drop very deep. And I think it was different against Arsenal. It was basically 2 6s. And you're right, they've been absolutely outstanding. I think both deserve like credit in the context as well. So obviously with Sasa Lukic, it took him a while, didn't it, to adapt, to get up to speed. Obviously there was a language barrier, more of a language barrier than most that joined Fulham. That's really not been a thing. Obviously Fulham's recruitment's been Premier League experience and yeah, or some kind of connection, which makes it easier to adapt. It's always reducing risk variables. That's always the common thread. He was slightly different. I think last season was a bit unfortunate in terms of the injuries and disruption, but we then saw his partnership with Harrison Reed and how impressive it became. This season, I think he's really taken his game to another level. This is a sign of a player that's getting to grips with the pace of the Premier League. What was the game I remember us talking about it, where he came on at halftime? Was it Chelsea? Fulham Chelsea? Or the Cup? Or was it Newcastle? I can't remember which one it was.
He came on at Chelsea and had one of the worst performances I think we've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, that was a player not up to speed, right? Like, just not up to speed. I mean, there was an element of coming off the bench and whatever, but it did speak to the common feeling about the way Sasa Lukic's adaptation had gone. That's just not a debate with him anymore. And he also seems comfortable in the 6, which was also a talking point, because he was always seen as a sort of, ball player, set things going, tempo conductor type player. But he's showing, like you said, I mean, to get close to the Palhinha defensive numbers is impressive. I think the other aspects less so, because I don't think they were really, particularly with progressing the ball, never really Palhinha's main strength. Lovely switcher of play. You would tend to offload that to Willian, to Pereira, to someone else to start getting things ticking. Sander Berger as well. When he joined Fulham, he basically didn't have a pre-season at Burnley because there was an expectation that he would go. So he was already undercooked. I think we saw that in the first few games he played as well. He joined.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely took a while for him to get up to speed.
Yeah, and Sasa Lukic was obviously playing fantastically well. Was never going to be disrupted by Silva. That's his thing. If you've got the shirt, you keep it. And he just is. It's taken, as things do, takes time to get used to position. He wasn't always played as a 6 either at Burnley. He's played as a 6 before. We talked about this when he signed, but he's relearned the position, the requirements of Marco Silva wants, and now we're seeing what he can do. Obviously, he was unwell recently, wasn't he? Which was a shame that he missed the game, but that hasn't seemingly interrupted him too much, which is great. But what it does mean is that base in the field looks incredibly strong. He's another signing that's come in and done really well. It's you look at you do look at some of the signings Fulham are making, and there just aren't that many misses, like relative to what to be a Premier League club the way you are, like to spend that amount of money on Berger for 20 million is a lot of money for Fulham. It can't be a miss, and it's not. And I think that's testament to the way Fulham have started to do their recruitment and just reduce those risk variables.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And actually, you kind of look at the signings from the last 2 summers, and there really haven't been. It's not like we've struck out on any of them massively. It's not like, not everyone has been perfect and a perfect addition. I don't think that's the case, but pretty much everyone has done some sort of job, when required at some point. And we're seeing the latest in that now from Sander Berger, obviously, and seeing where we get to. And, so far, so good. This was, I think, the performance that really announced him as a Fulham player, and was like, right, I've got a space here, I'll make it work. As you say, what's going to be interesting now is seeing how that partnership develops, because I think that once you play that well in a game like this, and I'll be absolutely stunned if they're not together again as a defensive shield against Liverpool, which we'll come on to in part 2, but that feels like the kind of game you would also play this kind of partnership in order to try and do a similar job to what they did and put out those fires left, right, and center. So you're kind of looking at it from that perspective. But I am interested as to what happens when we go forward from this perspective. Obviously, after the Liverpool game, it's Southampton, and you're expecting Fulham to dominate a little bit more. You're expecting Fulham at home to really kind of take the game to Southampton in that sense and look to kick up the table. That's a kind of different ask in some ways. And so whether that means that Sander Berger and Sasha Lukic play together and one of them plays more advanced, or they take turns in going more advanced. And that's not something that is weird. You can have, set upside that in midfield where one stays and one goes, but they both have the capacity to do it in different ways. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this kind of develops as a partnership and what it looks like in games where they're not being asked to continue to shuttle and shield in front of the back line.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because of Pereira as well, right? We have to address that too. Like he's been dropped out of the squad. Was it against Tottenham, wasn't it? In the aftermath of that interview, Marco Silva said, "What's a technical decision? Whatever." The optics are pretty self-evident, I think.
Yeah, pretty damning.
The fact he hasn't come back into the team suggested, and to be honest, it felt like an area that was like half resolved, didn't it? For most of the first half of the season, it's like Pereira's doing okay, but that's not. It just didn't seem like it was the right thing. I mean, the thing with Pereira,
like a permanent fix, right?
No. And the thing with Pereira was in the first couple of seasons was his off-ball work in a two, working either alongside Mitrovic or Jimenez or Muniz, whoever it was. That's what was exceptional. But he wasn't really doing that as the 8. So there is that room there for Lukic and Berger to strike up a partnership. And maybe this is one for the big games only. I don't know. Or you see more like Brighton, where we had Iwobi in there. You've got Wilson on one side and coming into the team. Obviously, Nelson's injured and don't know how severe that is with his hamstring injury. And hopefully it's not too severe, but short term doesn't look good. You've then got different ways of doing it. I like Iwobi in a central role. I think Iwobi's versatility is huge, and I'm sure you guys have praised him enough. I think in recent weeks, unbelievable season he's having. But he's another option, and that's the thing. And I think that's fine defensively. We can see the numbers. Like Fulham defensively this season have been superb. Just before we became on the pod, I was looking at their numbers. The 5th fewest expected goals conceded, so they're not conceding high quality chances this season. That's impressive. But then it's how does that impact your on the ball rotations that Fulham work so hard on? Those triangles, Robinson, Iwobi, and Smith-Rowe on the left. On the right, Tete, Traore, and it was Pereira. But obviously that may change. So that's hard to do during this, especially when the fixtures are piling up a bit. Obviously, Fulham playing this in a very similar way, have the same patterns all the time, so the players will be familiar with it. But that will be the adjustment. To what extent you lose something there, or what you might gain as well.
I'm just on Andreas. Came on and again I thought was busy in this game. He came on and made a difference in the Brighton game, in a game that Emile Smith-Rowe didn't have his best game. He came on here against Arsenal in a game where Emile Smith-Rowe didn't have his best game, was pretty crucial in the build up to the goal, and then went anonymous for pretty much the rest of his tenure on the pitch. I think everyone was very frustrated with that moment that he looked like he was through and managed to touch the ball backwards. I did come out slightly with the Karim Benzema. On my mother's life, don't pass him the ball. He's playing against us. But, it does feel like one of those things where you're like, you kind of hoped he was going to step up in this game. And, considering he was dropped for the City game earlier in the year and that Pereira came in there and did really well, right? And was a key part of how Fulham performed. Now, obviously, I think Fulham played better against City than they did against Arsenal. And yet one of them you come out with a point and one of them you come out with nothing. But it's just the way the game goes sometimes.
That's the game.
In these games where it is a little bit of a war of attrition, where it is about, making those presses, it is about trying to get you up the pitch, it is about making those big tackles at times in order to just get yourself out of holes. Pereira does come in and make a difference. And I think that on both counts here, he's proved, maybe there is going to still be lingering resentment. And look, if that's the case, then that's the case, right? Isn't, you can't change people's minds on this. And ultimately, he has come out and made statements that were probably a little bit stupid, right? I think they're slightly out of context, but equally, it doesn't change the fact that those statements are still made. And he has to live with the repercussions of what those statements are. But I think that coming out and putting in these type of performances in the cameos that he's been given, and being the last person coming around and clapping the Hammersmith end at the end of both games, which is bold considering there were boos for him, less so in the Arsenal game, but definitely in the Brighton game, is pretty brave. Maybe that changes if we don't get results in both of them, but it is what it is. I think that there is a sense there that he is still pushing to be a part of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's involved against Liverpool.
Yeah, it is. I think you're right. I think I think that the point you make with the Hammersmith end, I think that suggests certainly making an effort to try and
make
put
amends,
things right.
atone, if
I
you
mean,
will.
it'd be a very different feeling if he'd gone off first straight down the tunnel, right? So,
Yeah.
We know what he can do. I mean, it's set pieces. We talked about that and how Fulham have struggled. I mean, beyond him in terms of takers, it's slim pickings, right? So, yeah, I agree.
Smith-Rowe, perhaps. We did get a message about this from an Arsenal fan being like, he can take corners. So that was something that we could stick into. All right, let's park Arsenal there. After the break, we're going to talk about Liverpool, a little bit about some of the general stuff across the course of the season to wrap things up as well. Don't go anywhere.
This episode of Fulhamish is brought to you by NordVPN, which is the tool I use to watch all the festive football by changing the location of either my tablet, my laptop, or my phone. It is particularly perfect for those 3 p.m. kickoffs which aren't available here in the UK. All you need to do is go to NordVPN, change the location of your laptop or whatever device you're using, and then you can access platforms which are not only much cheaper than those here in the UK, they also show all the games, unlike what we have, where we only get a fraction of them. It means that I can watch every single Fulham game, whether it's on the telly or not. I also use NordVPN in order to access cheaper flights and hotels, as quite often, switch your location, you'll find those become a bit less expensive as well. You can use NordVPN on up to 10 devices, so I share my login with friends, family, and colleagues. And right now, you can get a great deal by going to nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. Not only will you get to access a great rate, but you get 4 extra months as well, and it's completely risk-free thanks to Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. So to get that great rate plus 4 extra months, go to nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. That's nordvpn.com/Fulhamish.
Welcome back to the Fulhamish podcast. That's all we're going to do on Arsenal. But if you missed it, make sure you go back and listen to Sammy's quick take after the game, which was filmed at the Craft Beer Company in Hammersmith Broadway. If you haven't been there, it's just inside the station. It's a really, really interesting place, especially if you're into beers that you can't get elsewhere. A constantly changing selection of keg beers, cask pumps, and all sorts of bottles and cans as well. Great little venue to pop into if you're heading back to Hammersmith Station. So make sure you check out the Craft Beer Company. We won't be going there this weekend, though, because we're off to Anfield, Peter, to face I was going to say runaway, but after the weekend that's just happened, probably not the runaway anymore, but the league leaders at the very least, whose game against Everton, the Merseyside derby, was called off last week because of Storm Dara. They played last night, as we record this, in the Champions League. Not too convincing performance against Girona away. Are we expecting more of the same from Fulham in this one?
I think so. Fulham have done pretty well on their trips to Anfield in general. I think the thing with Arne Slot's Liverpool, they are incredibly efficient now. Like they are like gone are the sort of Jurgen Klopp high press mania chaos style. This is efficient football. This is football that's playing to individual players' strengths, delivering results. It feels like the sort of the contract issue with Mohamed Salah is sort of inspiring him at the moment. It's like it's taking him to another level, which is not a good sign. You just assume, obviously they've got Mohamed Salah's contracts at the end of the season, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Virgil van Dijk. You just assume that at some point this is going to start having an impact on their football, but not yet, it seems. I agree with you. I don't think they were great against Girona. I think Arne Slot was pretty unhappy about the performance as well, particularly in the first half. But the thing about them this season is they just keep finding ways to get results. Like even Newcastle, the way that game was going, the crowd, the way Eddie Howard got the team and the crowd sort of going, and I mean Newcastle were desperate need of a result, and it just felt like that's the direction, that's where it was going. In the second half, Liverpool come back out, bring on Trent Alexander-Arnold. I mean, being able to do that does help. Change the game completely and come away with a pretty decent point, to be honest. And I think in this kind of odd season where actually, do you know what? It's not odd. It's almost like a reversion to what it should be, which is that no one is completely perfect and exceptional and going for 100 points. We're actually sort of looking at a bit more of a general level. Liverpool have emerged as probably the strongest of the pack so far. And I know you said they're not runaway leaders, but to have a 4-point gap with a game in hand against Everton, which they'll probably win. I know it's at Goodison Park. I know it's the last Merseyside derby there, but
yeah,
they are the strongest side of the challengers at the top end of the table at the moment. I'm sure Arsenal will come back. The flip side to this is that whenever I've watched Liverpool, I've had the feeling that then there will be a blip at some point. I don't get the sense that they are. I mean, they can't be exactly what Arne Slot wants at this point. What he's done very well is gone in and seen the group of players that he has and is maximizing the talent at his disposal. But I've never. This feels strange to say after the convincing performances against Manchester City and Real Madrid, which happened in the space of a few days. But I just get that feeling that there may be some kind of wobble at some point, and that will bring the others back into play. And then we'll see. Then we'll see if those factors might start affecting things if they're not all guns blazing. The difference being is that they have the experience of going the distance. So, but from a Fulham perspective, this is going to be probably different to the games we've seen at Anfield in recent seasons.
Yeah,
in that they have tended to be pretty entertaining, pretty end to end. Fulham have tended to give quite a bit back. This is probably going to feel more like you're being put in a vice and squeezed. And it's just whether you can keep your head above the water. And Fulham did that against Arsenal. So they are capable of causing problems for Liverpool too, I think. But this will be a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of there. I'm kind of hot on Liverpool because I feel like they might have had some of their wobbles and that they've just been able to come through them. Because
that is true. What I'm seeing as potential further wobbles may actually be the wobbles originally, and now they iron them out. So that is,
yeah. I don't know. Like the only thing you kind of look at is you kind of worry about this injury list a tad, or worry about it. You can kind of maybe take some joy in it in that regard and say, okay, if Ibrahim Konate is going to remain out, I think he is. Connor Bradley's going to remain out, I think he is. Kostas Tsimikas remains out as well. Diogo Jota's back in training, but I think this might end up too close and too quickly for him. Same with Federico Chiesa. Does that leave them a little bit light in terms of rotation? And obviously it's a Tuesday, Saturday, so it's not as bad as it potentially could be, but you're assuming they're not going to be able to rotate the fullbacks. You're assuming they're not really going to be able to rotate in the middle because there's, players in there that are currently injured. You're looking in the midfield and thinking, okay, could they change it up a little bit? Maybe someone like Harvey Elliott comes in to play against his former club, but there's not loads of options in there. Although Alexis McAllister, I think is now banned for this game because he was meant to be banned for the Merseyside derby and isn't in here. So I think he might be out, although I'd have to check that. And then the front three, okay, Cody Gakpo could come in for Luis Diaz, but you're kind of expecting it to be Darwin and Mo Salah in there as well. So there's not loads about it that's going to be able to rotate before the weekend. And considering that was quite a grueling performance, not one of their best, they had to grind it out in Girona. Maybe there's something there that Fulham can take advantage of, especially early in the game, if there's a little bit of fatigue kicking in, especially after having a week off ourselves. So we'll see if Fulham can kind of find joy there. If they are going to find joy, I feel like it's going to be down this right-hand side. And so that's where things get interesting in terms of how Fulham set up, I think, Peter, because Andy Robertson's still a wonderful player on his day. But if you can get into those areas and get between the fullback and the centre-back in those channels, I think that's the only place that we've really seen Liverpool kind of vaguely struggle to deal with things in this season so far. And I think that Fulham have players who can thrive in those little gaps. Alex Iwobi comes to mind in those spaces, but also Raul likes to drift off and make things happen in those areas as well. So there is something that I think Fulham can dig into in those spaces. It's just a question of, we mentioned it in the Arsenal segment, by playing with this kind of quasi five at the back that Fulham have been using in these big games, you perhaps don't quite get that space for someone like an Alex Iwobi to drift into the gaps that he might normally drift into. And that means that Fulham might not be able to attack those areas of potential weakness quite as they might have liked if this Liverpool side was a little bit weaker.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think you're right in pointing to Robertson. It feels like he's having a trickier season. It's interesting, actually, because there are a few fullbacks you could look at in that sort of vein. You've got Robertson, Kyle Walker, Kieran Trippier's sort of disappeared a little bit. Anyway, but I agree. That's probably the space you look to target. I think, obviously, with the Spurs game, you had Reece Nelson on the left. I'd imagine that maybe Traore comes back onto the right, and then you put Iwobi back to the left, and you just restart those combinations on that side of Tete, Traore, Robinson, Iwobi, and maybe that's the way to do it. You've got it feels like Tete is Traore's foil, right? This is the payoff. You play Traore, you play Kenny Tete. It's a balance thing. If you play Timothy Castagna, he's more of a front foot fullback than Kenny is. But you feel like Traore up against Robertson constantly on a transition and a turnover. That's a battle that can be won. Now, it could be Trent on the other side, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and you would probably back Traore to cause him problems too. So maybe we see a game where Marcus Silva deploys Traore where he can be most useful, fire the shotgun on which side demands it for maximum impact. But yeah, that's a similar pattern to the City game. Trying to use Traore in that way, similar pattern to what tried against Arsenal was harder to do. But I think that would also see trying to restart the on the ball stuff a bit better. But like we said, if it's going to be a similar pattern to Arsenal, you're probably not going to have that much on the ball. Maybe you do go, right, let's just have our Lukic Burger shield and then just take advantage of everything else on the transition. So that's probably the best way to set it up, I think. It'd be, and then obviously you look to use Wilson from the bench late on as well, see if he can net one against his old club.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, but I do think that they're going to utilize a similar system with Iwobi tucking in a right wing back, purely because I think that you want another kind of Jedi double up job on Mo Salah. Obviously, he's made chili oil out of Bukayo Saka. Now, can he bottle up Mo Salah? If he can do those in the space of a week, then there are going to be envious eyes looking Fulham's way, I think, in the next couple of transfer windows, if they weren't in ready, right? But it is a big challenge. Obviously, Salah's been absolutely exceptional this season. So was Saka, right? And Jedi did a really, really good job out there. And I thought that the Fulham did a good job of kind of making sure that he wasn't able to utilize the options. Can they do that again on someone of Mo Salah's quality? I mean, it's yet to be seen, but I would be very surprised if Fulham don't opt for a similar approach. And that's why I think you end up with Iwobi at right wing back again, if you will, because I think it allows you to kind of double up on Salah in a way that you perhaps can't without.
Well, I disagree. I disagree about yet to be seen, because Robinson's done this before against Salah, and I think he's done it twice. He did it on the first game of the season back when Fulham were promoted.
Joe Bryan back, actually. Wasn't he the one that Mo Salah said was the hardest defender he's had to face in the Premier League one year? Absolutely glorious.
Was it Joe Bryan?
I'm pretty sure it was Joe Bryan. Mo Salah was like,
no, it wasn't. Was it Salah or was it someone else? I think it might be someone else. I don't know if it was Salah.
I thought it was Salah that basically said that.
Either way, Robinson has pocketed Salah, because he did it in the 4-3 defeat, which was that last season or the season before last? I'm losing track of time. I think it was last season. No, it wasn't. It was the season before. Where it was exceptional. Probably the best performance I've seen from Robinson one-on-one defensively was that day when Fulham lost. So I think he's capable of doing it. I think he's really good 1v1. I think that's an aspect of his game that's probably become now his strength, because he can make the recoveries. If he loses half a yard, he can get there. He's very good at reading the play and making interceptions. I think when I interviewed him at the end of last season, we talked about Mohamed Salah, and we also talked about making those interceptions. And he said that Silva tells him not to try not to over predict making those movements, because he knows because you're quick enough to do it. You don't need to be in that position, because by preempting it so much, you actually leave another space that's actually harder to recover. But yeah, I mean, Antonee Robinson's, Silva said it, didn't he, after the Arsenal game, one of the best left backs in the league. I don't think there's any disputing that, really. I still think he has a very specific profile of player, but as a left back, in terms of he's not a left back that's going to invert. That's not really.
Although he has done that for the US recently, which was quite weird.
I know. Yeah, I have. I haven't watched it, so I can't offer.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't think that's his natural game.
No,
that would be my assessment. You want him making the 100-yard recoveries. That's him. And yeah, there isn't really anyone like that in his position in the league now. I don't think.
No, I would agree.
So. No.
Yeah, I think he's quite a unique profile.
Indeed. You kind of. I mean, Man United are looking for a left wing back, aren't they? I mean, they're going to need to get one, and they're playing with a 3-4-3 system, which wants someone going on the outside. So, look, I don't know. That's me pointing to things, but I think we've talked about Robinson having interest before. I think that's only going to continue if he keeps up the performances, and I imagine this weekend is another opportunity to, and I think he will do very well this weekend again.
Yeah, I mean, let's hope so. Last one on Liverpool, or last two, should we say? Who would you play in the 10 and who would you play in the 9? Obviously, Raul did very, very well against Arsenal in the first sort of 15, 20 minutes, scored a brilliant goal. But I thought that Muniz handled himself really well with Liverpool games last season, but also in the game against Brighton. And I have been critical of him this season. I don't think he's particularly effective off the bench, but I did think he did well in that Brighton game. But for me, I think this is a game where you drop Emile Smith-Rowe. You've had two disappointing performances in two big games in pretty tricky and treacherous conditions, and I understand that, but not able to get his foot on the ball and probably not cut out for games where Fulham aren't going to dominate with the ball in hand and actually is being asked to do a lot of the off-ball work. This is a game I would bring Andreas back in for.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I asked Silver about Smith-Rowe and consistency, and when talking about the Brighton game, he was basically saying that because of the way Brighton pressed man on man, specifically with him, with Fulham's build-up, they really needed the 9. You have to go beyond your midfield and you go into your 9, and that's why the hold-up is so important in that scenario. I think you'll probably end up with a similar treatment at Liverpool. So your points are linked. The 10 and the 9, they're linked, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
If you're not relying on Smith-Rowe to get on the ball and hold it, you need your 9 to do that, and that's probably why I think Jimenez will keep his place. Not because I don't think Muniz can do it. I think when he had his purple patch last season, he really did show that he's capable of doing that consistently. Yeah. I think Jimenez is better at it technically. I think he's a better technical player. So I think that might sway it. Do you drop Smith-Rowe? I think that's a tricky one because Smith-Rowe can win you a game on his own. And I agree that Pereira off the ball will be pretty useful for his energy, especially in these games. And not just energy, but tactical awareness. Clearly he's used in different ways to impart instructions in terms of the way Fulham press. So that does make a difference. I don't think Smith-Rowe quite offers the same off the ball. So I'm thinking about this on the spot because you put it to me and I don't know what to do. So yeah, I think Jimenez will start. I feel like that's the way to go. And I'm coming around to the idea of having Pereira in front of Berger and Lukic purely because of the off-ball stuff. It's tricky. That's so tough. That is really tough.
In the City game, here's one for you. In the City game, actually, the Fulham shape looked a little bit different. It looked a bit like a 5-4-1 at the weekend against Arsenal. It looked a bit more like a 5-3-2 against City at times, with Raul up there with Traore, which I don't think you can do if Emile Smith-Rowe is one of your midfield 3. Whereas I think if it's Andreas, you can kind of switch that out so that you end up with 2 kind of players running at the top. And you have this midfield kind of, rather than having, one and strung across, you end up with a slightly more kind of tight ship in there. And I think that Andreas's kind of inclusion facilitates that a little bit more, and it allows for them to be slightly more effective in transition. If that's where we assume that goals are going to come from this weekend, that's where I'd go.
I'm quite sold. I'm sold. I'm persuaded. It was not my thought process, but yeah, no, I see it now. And then give Smith-Rowe a rest, bring him back in. Southampton scores a hat-trick, and everyone will be like, why didn't he play?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's good to have competition in the squad. All right, well, there it is. Our trip to Liverpool this weekend. I don't think I'm expecting anything, Peter, but I wouldn't be shocked. And, I was on the Anfield wrap last week ahead of the Arsenal game and was talking to Neil Atkinson, and he basically was just like, there's no world where I don't see Fulham giving everybody a game. He's like, I still think we will win this. He said, I think Arsenal will probably win at the weekend. He's like, but there's no way they will come out of it thinking they haven't been in a game. And it's quite a nice praise from a a neutral or someone who doesn't support the club to kind of feel those kind of people are witnessing Fulham and they're like, yeah, there are no easy games against this Fulham unit. And that's an interesting place for a club of our size to be.
Yeah, there's 3 years worth of evidence of that as well. Like it's been the same in each season. The difference being the results, I think. I think that was a real frustration, particularly in the first season, that there weren't more results that were eye-catching, and also just not talked about, I suppose. And it's nice for under the radar, but also you want your flowers, don't you? So we're at a point now where the big teams have all played Fulham multiple times. They've all struggled. Like there have been moments. It's actually pretty rare for Fulham to get battered. I mean, there was even the 5-1 at City. Yeah, but they were down 10 men and just
I know how many messes.
But even the 5-1 at City, that first half before the Ake offside decision, Ake Akanji offside decision, was incredibly tight. And I think that's just the expectation with Fulham now, and that's credit to the team and to the manager for getting the team in that position. And that there have been games. I mean, even now I think about it, Arsenal took Fulham apart. Was it last season at the Cottage?
No, we won last season at the Cottage.
It wasn't last season, but the season before. The season before. Okay, we're winding back the clock a bit. But either way, the general theme is that Fulham give everyone a game. So I expect more of the same. But this is a different Liverpool who might make that very, very difficult.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're a very good side, and I would be surprised if we get anything, but we live in hope always. And Peter, before we go, we are obviously in the middle of December now, and that January transfer market is starting to loom large on the horizon. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what the feeling is. You've spoken to Marco Silva at these press conferences. There's obviously been a few quotes from him basically saying, we're not going to bring in anyone that we don't think improves the squad, which is fair enough. Is there anywhere in this squad that you see Fulham kind of making a move to, make some sort of statement in January that might end up pushing Fulham towards those European places?
I think with January, I think Marco Silva said before that if you're making a big play in January, it means you've done something wrong in the summer, generally. I don't really think that's the case. I'm trying to think back to the summer and what Fulham were after. I mean, there's a question around the centre forward in that Carlos Vinicius nearly left. And then the Jay
and might leave in January.
And probably will want to go in January, yeah. Then the Jay Stansfield stuff happened. That's might be an area again that comes up because Silva will want 3 number 9s in his team. But I don't think there's any essential area for the club at the moment. I mean, they, like he said, if you're going to sign someone, it has to be someone who actively improves what the team have got. So yeah, not that I'm aware at the moment, but we are getting to that point of the year. Thank you for reminding me. So I need to start asking around again about stupid transfers. But yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see. I'm just looking up Tom Kearney's red card. He's got 3 game ban, hasn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So
when is he back?
For the Southampton game, if he returns.
Okay,
so
fine.
That's it. I mean, look,
I was wondering if he'd missed Christmas because that would be very, very well timed, but not quite.
No, not quite.
Just slightly missed time from Tom then.
I'm just kind of looking at the last 3 years or the last 2 years in terms of what players went where and who Fulham have brought in. Last year, Fulham only brought in Armando Broja on loan. He ended up obviously not playing because of Rodrigo Muniz's hot streak. The year before that, Shane Duffy came in from Brighton on that kind of weird 6-month deal. And Sasha Lukic came in, who took some time to get used to it. And we signed Cedric on deadline day from Arsenal, right back as well as a bit of cover. So it's not like Fulham have made loads of moves, but I would be unsurprised if Fulham made a loan move in January for a number 9. And this is why this whole Evan Ferguson story is interesting, I think, from Fulham's perspective. If there is a deal that can be done there to bring in a player of that kind of quality. Now, I know Fabian Rutzler has played it down, said he's part of the squad. We want him here, but equally, for someone who was so highly touted, we were talking about, probably unfairly, but the press were talking about, should we say, £100 million player. Brighton was apparent valuation for Evan Ferguson a couple of years ago. For him to be now 3rd, 4th choice striker in this pecking order is not exactly where he'll have wanted to be. And so he's going to be wanting to come out and get minutes somewhere. Whether Fulham can lead that race or not, I don't know. But I can't think of many better places in the Premier League where he would come in and almost certainly be the starting number 9 immediately.
Yeah.
West Ham, perhaps.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, would you want to help the development of Ferguson over Muniz?
I think if you do that, you need to have an option. There needs to be an option on it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's fine.
So I don't think so. I'd be surprised. Just taking a look back now, I think obviously we've got Kenny Tete entering the last 6 months of his contract as well, which will be a factor in the last few months of the season about what he does. Obviously, he's been playing a lot and is doing really well. So see if that amounts to new terms. But that would again might present the old right back, because you mentioned all these right backs that come in, fullbacks on deadline day. Cedric. So let's see.
No Cedric, please. I don't want Cedric Suarez back.
I don't know where Cedric is actually. Where is Cedric these days? Where is he hanging out?
Cedric Suarez is nowhere.
Okay. Well, there we go.
He doesn't have a club. So that's where. I mean, look, less than 18 months ago, he was in the preliminary Portugal squad. So last year he didn't make he made 3 senior appearances for Arsenal in the Premier League last year. And then spent some time with the under-21s and appears to have run out of his contract and nobody has signed him. So that probably speaks. Or maybe we'll sign him for a free. You never know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I'd be surprised if there's anything wholesale or anything like that. But yeah, it's January. It's not. Yeah, it would be interesting. I don't think it'll be a busy month. I mean, it always gets busy towards the end of the month, but it does feel like it'd be quiet. And if there is anything, it would probably be alone.
Okay. All righty. Well, with that, I think it was probably time for us to call this podcast to a close. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much for returning, Mr. Peter Rutzler. Peter, always a pleasure.
No, thanks for having me on again, Jack. I'm glad I'm not persona non grata on these parts just yet.
Not yet.
No, I'm looking forward to. I've got
recording. You might be.
I've got. I think I'm doing Fulham Bournemouth. I think.
Peter Rutzler derby.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have to do that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So contractually, yeah, it was part of the move. No, it wasn't.
It was quite your demands.
So I'll be down for that as well. But no, thanks for having me on. I'll be keeping an eye on all things Fulham. But yeah, as well as my other requirements of the role. It's good to see you, Jack.
It was good to see you too, mate. Good luck with everything and hope that everything continues to go well in the new gig. That's all from us on the Thursday Club. I've been Jack Collins. We will be back on Sunday talking all the bits and bobs from Anfield. So make sure you get onto that for all of your fallout. There'll be a quick take up on the YouTube channel as well. So make sure you check that out. But for now, thank you so much for listening as ever. And we'll see you very shortly. Take it easy. You whites.